Snow learned the shape of silver pine the way grief learns the shape of a man's chest, quietly, patiently, until everything familiar was softened and buried, and on that Christmas night the town looked like a lantern-lit memory drifting in white silence, each house breathing warmth behind frosted windows while the dark road lay empty and listening, as if it expected someone who never came. Caleb Holt, age 30, widower, stood alone in his cabin and set the table the way he always did on Christmas, his hands steady out of habit rather than hope, the wood scarred by years of honest use, the plates plain and clean, two of them placed with care as if symmetry could summon mercy, the fire murmuring low as it ate another split log, and the smell of stew rising to meet a ceiling that had heard prayers before and would hear them again, someday. He paused when he reached for the second cup. The enamel chipped along the rim where another hand had once tapped it in laughter, and he set it down anyway, because not setting it felt worse, because absence demanded its own place, because love did not vanish just because the body did, and he spoke softly to the room as if it could answer, "Merry Christmas wherever you are," his voice thinning like breath in cold air. He pulled out the empty chair and nudged it closer to the table, a small courtesy that no one saw, and he added, "I kept the place for you. I always do," then sat across from the space where memory lived and ate in the company of his own patience, listening to the wind scrape the eaves and wondering how a night could be so full everywhere else and so hollow here, when a knock found him before the thought finished. The sound was small, almost swallowed by the weather, a knuckles plea against wood, and when he opened the door the storm leaned in with a hiss and revealed a young native woman standing uncertainly on the threshold, her shoulders drawn tight against the cold, her dark hair braided and damp with snow, her eyes careful but unbroken, and he learned in that instant that her name was Rika, age 20, an orphan who sold candles in town and measured her days by how much light she could carry, without spilling it. "Would you buy some candles?" she asked, the words arranged politely, her gaze lowered not in shame but in habit, as if the world required it of her, and Caleb saw the thin leather pouch at her side, the wax scent clinging to her clothes, the way her fingers shook despite her effort to still them, and he said, surprised by the gentleness that came to him so easily, "You shouldn't be out in this cold alone," while the sky decided otherwise. The wind rose like a voice finding its courage, snow thickened until the road disappeared, and the dark pressed close enough to touch, and when Rika turned as if to leave, as if refusal was safer than hospitality, the storm answered with a howl that snapped branches and erased direction, and Caleb stepped into the doorway and said, firm but kind, "No one goes out in this storm, you will stay here tonight," knowing how such words could sound and choosing them carefully anyway. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said, the sentence practiced, the apology old, and he shook his head once, slow, the way a man does when he has learned that haste only feeds regret, and answered, "You won't. Not here," then stood aside so she could pass, offering space instead of touch, shelter instead of promise, while the door closed on the storm and left them alone with the fire and the question of what comes next. They sat apart at first, the table between them like a treaty, candlelight breathing along the walls, and Caleb poured stew into a bowl and set it near her without comment, because hunger did not need explanation, and she accepted with a nod that held gratitude tightly, and the only sounds were the spoon against ceramic and the pop of sap in the logs, until the silence softened enough to be shared. "I learned early that no one waits for me," Rika said at last, not looking up, the words falling like snow, light, numerous, and heavy all the same, and Caleb felt the truth of it in the way she held herself, balanced and alone, and he answered without trying to fix it, "I learned that even love can be taken away," the admission opening a door he usually kept shut. "Does it still hurt?" she asked, and the question was not curious so much as careful, a hand extended without expectation, and he nodded, eyes on the fire. "Every day, but tonight a little less," and the fire seemed to listen, burning lower but warmer, as if it approved of the exchange. When morning came it arrived muffled and pale, the storm finally spent, the town buried in a quiet so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath, and Rika rose before the fire cooled because leaving was easier than explaining, because gratitude did not buy bread and tenderness could not pay for safety, and Caleb stood in the doorway watching her step back into the snow with her bundle of candles and her careful dignity, the space she left behind already aching with her absence, as if the cabin itself had noticed and did not approve. By midday the whispers moved faster than the thaw, sliding along walls and slipping through half-open doors, and in the marketplace eyes followed Rika the way shadows follow light, curious and unkind, voices sharpened by certainty they had not earned. That girl is trying to trap him. She spent the night with him. And Rika stood at her small wooden stall, her breath fogging the air as she sold flame to people who refused to meet her gaze, her fingers steady even as her heart wavered, whispering to herself, "I only wanted to sell candles," as if wanting warmth were a sin she needed to forgive herself for. They gathered without her, as towns always do when they believe absence equals permission, deciding her fate with nods and folded arms and the comfort of shared judgment. "Drive that girl out," someone said, and the sentence traveled through the cold until it found Rika by evening like a blade slipped gently between ribs, and she went to Caleb with her shoulders squared and her sorrow folded neatly inside her coat, already halfway gone. "I should leave. I bring you shame," she told him, because shame was the one thing the world had never failed to give her. "You bring nothing but truth," he said, and the certainty in his voice startled them both, because he had not spoken so plainly since grief taught him how to be careful with hope, and in that moment Rika saw not a man defending her, but a man choosing her, and when the town pressed him the next day he met them in the street, standing still in the middle of their noise like a fixed point the world had to move around. His voice calm and steady as falling snow. "This girl is innocent, and if honor is a crime, then I am guilty," stepping in front of her not in anger but in devotion, as if love itself had taken human shape. "You'll have to go through me first," he added, and the silence that followed was not surrender, but it was hesitation, it was doubt, it was the first crack in cruelty, and behind him Rika felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, fragile and warm, a trust she had never been allowed to keep before, resting there quietly, daring to believe it might be safe to stay. After that they walked together sometimes, not to be seen and not to make promises, but because walking side by side softened the world, because the road felt less heavy when their footsteps kept the same rhythm, and as dusk fell they lit candles along the street, one by one, small flames lifting their fragile heads against the dark as if answering it with quiet courage, and Caleb watched the way Rika shielded each wick with her hands, careful and reverent, and said once, almost to himself, "Light changes even the coldest night," and Rika looked up at him with a smile she rarely allowed herself, gentle and unguarded, and answered, "So do kind people," and their hands drifted close enough for warmth to be felt, close enough for breath to catch, yet still apart, the space between them humming with everything they were afraid to name. The sheriff came next, his boots loud with borrowed authority, his badge gleaming as if shine alone could pass for righteousness. "Drive that girl out," he ordered, certain the word girl would shrink her, and Caleb did not raise his voice or his hand, only met the demand with a stillness that carried weight. "I won't," and when the threat sharpened, "Then you stand against us all," Caleb nodded once, accepting the cost before it was collected. So be it, because he had learned that some loves arrive not with comfort, but with consequence, and still ask to be chosen. That night the cabin held its breath as Rika stood near the door with her few belongings gathered small and careful, tears burning quietly where no one could see them fall. "Your life would be easier without me," she said, the sentence shaped by a lifetime of being asked to disappear, and Caleb crossed the space between them then, slow and deliberate, not touching her, not yet, but close enough that she could feel his warmth and the certainty of his choice. "You didn't come into my life as a storm," he said softly, his voice breaking where honesty lived. "You came as light," and Rika inhaled sharply, as if something inside her finally loosened, as if she had been holding her breath since childhood. "Then let me stay," she whispered, eyes shining with fear and hope entwined, "not as a burden, but as your heart," and the silence that followed wrapped them both in a promise neither dared to break. They married when the snow fell gently, not to hide anything but to bless it, the sky lowering itself into silence as if the world wished to listen, candles lining the narrow aisle of the small church and spilling into the open air beyond its doors, their flames trembling but unbroken, much like the woman walking between them, and the neighbors watched with the careful wonder of people witnessing something they did not yet understand, something quiet and brave, and when Caleb spoke his vows he did not dress them in poetry because truth did not need ornament. I promise to stand before the world for you, always, and his voice carried the weight of every time he already had, and Rika lifted her chin, her eyes bright and steady, and answered, I promise to walk beside you, without fear, and in that moment her name was spoken with honor, her presence acknowledged without condition, as if the world itself were finally learning how to say her name correctly. Marriage did not chase winter away, but it taught them how to keep warm within it, mornings unfolding slowly with shared coffee and steam rising between their hands, laughter arriving shyly at first and then staying, guarded like a precious thing, and when Rika laughed at the snow clinging stubbornly to her skirts and said, breathless and bright, I never knew snow could feel warm, Caleb watched her with the quiet reverence of a man who knew what it had cost them to arrive here and smiled the way only someone who has earned joy can smile. It does, he said softly, when you're not alone, and the cabin, once hollow with memory, learned new sounds, footsteps that returned, voices that lingered, love that did not ask permission. Then the storm came again, harsher and careless, the kind that did not announce itself as a test but arrived as one all the same, and when a cry cut through the wind like a wound torn open, Rika did not hesitate, her body already moving toward the door as if courage lived deeper than fear. Don't go! Caleb shouted, terror sharp as ice in his throat, and she turned once, snow collecting in her hair, her eyes steady as a flame protected by cupped hands. If I can save one life, she said, calm and certain, let it be worth it, and she stepped into the white with her candles and her heart, lighting a path where none should have existed, carrying love forward into the storm. They found the lost man alive by morning, his hands burned raw from the cold but his heart still beating, still choosing to stay, and the town stood wordless as Rika returned, snow melting into her dark hair, her shoulders bowed not in shame but in exhaustion, dignity intact and glowing brighter than any flame, and at last someone lowered their head and spoke the words that mattered most. We were wrong, and it was enough, not to erase the past, but to let the truth breathe, to let love stand where it had always belonged, warm and unafraid. Years later, when winter returned the way it always did, quiet, patient, and unafraid, and snow drifted down to hush the world once more, candlelight would glow in their window like a promise kept, and Rika would rest her head against Caleb's shoulder and ask in a voice softened by time and trust, "Do you think storms ever truly end?" And he would look at the light holding steady against the dark, at the woman who had once stood trembling on his doorstep, and now stood at the center of his life. And he would answer slowly, as if the truth deserved care, "No, but love teaches us how to survive them, and if you listen closely on winter nights, when the snow falls thick and the world grows still, you can hear that lesson carried softly through the air, a quiet reassurance meant for anyone who has ever stood alone in the cold, waiting for a door to open."